Dr. Balazar back with a classic of Russian cinema, Stalker from 1979. I always feel like I need to do a little bit of clarification when I break down a classic. Feel free to use the timestamps to jump past the intro if you're a returning viewer. For any movie that's been around for a hot minute, one can find a wealth of opinions. Promotional work, scholarly reviews, informal media like YouTube channels provide a cross-section of views that range from embarrassingly contrived to thoughtfully considered. If a movie is successful, one can also find interviews, making of specials, and commentaries that allow those involved in the production to describe their perspectives, which is all well and good, but I don't make videos on movies and shows because people ask me to recite the ideas of others. And to be perfectly honest, I don't take an active interest in what someone with a vested interest in half-truths have said in the past, or what the people who go through life reciting the ideas of others have come across and believe to be gospel at this time. I was on a stage myself several weeks ago, and it's easy to say the intended effect of the performance was this or that, but the audience experienced the show however they experienced the show, regardless of my designs as one of the performers. This is the basic concept of artistic interpretation. Cinema is a performance art, which may be objectively defined, but also subjectively interpreted by anyone who views it, and nobody is under any obligation to defer to the opinions of others when they do so, nor do they simply not understand something if their perspective diverges from previously established opinions. I make videos that express my own observational logic as it relates to storyline, characters, world-building, and themes, while also providing context that I believe to be relevant, though far from exhaustive. That being said, this video is my subjective thoughts on the movie Stalker from 1979. Thanks for the view, love your face, never forget our time together. For context, let's start with the general and make our way to the specific. In his literary work, War and Peace, Leo Tolstoy noted that different countries have different versions of self-assurance tied up in their national vibe. And a Russian is self-assured just because he knows nothing and does not want to know anything, since he does not believe that anything can be known. Which is an interesting way to self-describe his culture. And while I'm not getting into the philosophical underpinning of this ideology, it does speak to the fact that when dealing with anything related to Russia, one has to be prepared for a degree of the nonsensical and unexplained. The left side of the brain just has to shrug and say it's Russian art. Don't try to make sense of it because there's nothing to make sense of. Just fill in the blanks with your imagination and move along. My favorite short story that exemplifies this principle is The Nose by Nikolai Gogol, link in description. In terms of Russian cinema, well, in the halcyon days of motion pictures, Americans ran with the idea of film as business, while Western Europeans ran with the idea of film as art, and Russians kind of did their own thing under the Soviet system, often with montages for whatever reason. In 1939, American audiences were taken aback by Clark Gable's use of the word damn in the finale of Gone with the Wind, while in 1925, Russian audiences shrugged at a baby being bayoneted in its stroller near the finale of the battleship Potemkin. Cultures can be funny like that. The Kuleshov effect also came out of Russian cinema, which was the discovery that viewers are deeply impacted by sequential shots because of a transference effect one image has on the next image, giving filmmakers greater insight into a significant tool with which to influence audience emotions. For more on that, I'll link in description. I just don't want to get too bogged down going on tangents today. So there's a long cinematic history in Russia, and one needs to approach the films with the expectation that at times they may not resemble American or Western European film. The director of Stalker, Andrei Tarkovsky, was a legendary director known for films such as Solaris, Nostalgia, and The Sacrifice. But he also was a man of his times, cut from the cloth of Sergio Leone, he of the Man with No Name trilogy, Once Upon a Time in the West, and Once Upon a Time in America fame, which means a viewer can bank on long shots lasting for minutes at a time, especially close-ups on actors' heads, though not necessarily their faces, glacier slow pacing for artistic effect, soliloquies monologuing directly to the audience, in subtitles of course, and films begrudgingly edited down to nearly 3 hours telling stories that can be told in about 45 minutes. Or in the case of Stalker, a movie begrudgingly made into 2 parts due to production hell, and rejoined into 1 further on down the road. If those features are an issue for a viewer, there's no getting around them. They're baked into the loaf. The source material for Stalker is the novel Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky. God damn it, Russian names just put me on the struggle bus. Who worked with Tarkovsky to adapt the book into a screenplay that retained the spirit of the thing, but did a massive overhaul in the story. The basic concept of the novel is this. What if aliens were going somewhere and merely pulled over on the Earth for a picnic, making little effort to clean up after themselves before moving on to wherever they were headed? How the trash left behind impacted the local wildlife, or what meaning the primitives on Earth ascribed to it, would neither be noticed nor ignored, and certainly not a part of a grand scheme of some kind. This would open the door to humans being impacted in fantastic ways by alien technology and philosophizing about it from different perspectives, without the ability to confirm or refute anyone's point of view. Which leads us to Stalker. The storyline opens with a text scroll introducing the setting of the Zone, where aliens have their picnic and the trash they left behind either makes people disappear, makes people's deepest desires come true, or both. The government has quarantined it off, so anyone that wants to find out for themselves needs to break in with the help of a person called a stalker. We meet that stalker, whose wife doesn't want him to go back into the Zone, and a writer and professor, who is going to lead to a room in the Zone that grants wishes. He breaks them in through arguably the worst defended guard post in movie history, and they wander their way through the Zone. The stalker guides the men by throwing satin tied to lug nuts. It's either implied he has a psychic power that allows him to navigate an invisible minefield by tossing cloth, or I just assumed that was the case because Russians, logic, fill in the blanks. They wander through the zone's invisible maze over land and through underground tunnels, debating philosophy as they go, and eventually arrive at the threshold of the room where wishes come true. One of the men chooses not to enter the room, and the other pulls out a bomb to blow it up, but opts not to detonate it after more philosophical debate. We cut back to the bar where the boys have a beer, the stalker plays with his kid and cries to his wife a bit, and it's revealed that his daughter has the power of telekinesis. After just under 3 hours, roll credits. For characters, let's begin with the stalker. His concept is a salt-of-the-earth type rather than an intellectual, so his character is tied up in the themes of idealism and faith. He believes in the zone and the wish-granting room in a religious way, in the spirit of something redemptive for the worthy, like a peasant's medieval concept of heaven as reward for a life of hardship and meaningless toil. He's miserable in the actual world, which Tarkovsky illustrates by using a brown monochrome color saturation to make it all visually drab, and feels alive in his own, as illustrated by its colorization. Like anyone who explains the world in religious terms, he struggles with the cause and effect of things that are unjust, and relies on faith in place of observable evidence, but makes for a good counterpoint to the other characters' philosophies. The writer is the first intellectual we meet, and his character concept is tied up in cynicism. He's presented as a successful writer motivated to enter the zone in search of inspiration, since he's become bored of life in general and disillusioned by his readers in particular. He spends the most time challenging the other characters' ideas, and monologues the frustrations of the artist in society, so most likely he's Tarkovsky's mouthpiece, since the filmmaker is an artist himself. He opts not to enter the room for reasons seemingly tied up in cynicism, as he's not convinced the room actually grants wishes, refuses to humble himself with rituals that present too close to a prayer, and prefers to keep his innermost desires to himself if it does grant such things. At one point he dons a crown of thorns, which is impossible to relate to anything besides a certain well-known carpenter that returned from the dead, but it seems to be more of an artsy visual thing rather than a metaphor for the Christian martyr. The professor is the second intellectual, and his character concept is tied up in pragmatism. His motives are teased as scientific discovery, then personal glory, as represented by a Nobel Prize, then revealed to be a desire to destroy the wish-granting room. His line of thinking is that eventually the power of the room will fall into the wrong hands and do harm to others on an unprecedented scale, so it needs to be destroyed to keep humanity safe. Why he disarms the bomb instead of setting it off is a bit ambiguous. Both the stalker and writer make arguments that might have moved him, so the viewer gets to settle on his exact rationale for themselves. It appears he didn't enter the room out of fear of negative consequences, but then again at the start of the movie the text scroll is cited as an interview with a Nobel Prize-winning scientist, and since the two intellectuals go by titles rather than names, that could have been him, meaning perhaps he did enter the room and wish personal glory after all. There's a lot of opportunities to explain character behaviors in different ways. As mentioned earlier, interpretation of art is a thing regardless of what someone's smartphone may say about it. The stalker's wife is given just enough screen time to call a character instead of just a plot device. At the start, she's the usual unsupportive wife trope, not wanting her husband to do something, and while we know he's going to do it anyway, it suggests danger and pushes up the emotional stakes a bit, which is why it's a plot function that gets used so often in movies. At the end, she shows caring and support for him, making her more well-rounded as a marriage partner, and monologues to the audience a bit to get across some themes related to joy, sadness, and hope. The last character is the stalker's child, a mutant with the power to move things with her mind. She doesn't do anything, but they colorize her while keeping everything else outside the zone in monochrome. That may be your connection to the zone, so she's in color because she's bringing something of the zone out of its physical boundaries. Or it may tie into the stalker's emotional state. He feels miserable in the world but joyful in the zone, and since his daughter also gives a bit of joy, she's colorized as well. Interpretation of art, your call, amigo. The world building is a bit of a mixed bag. The concept of alien contact steeped in indifference is a fascinating notion. Most books and movies conceptualize aliens on equal terms with humans, driven by a jealous resentment of some kind, or a paternalistic goal of raising humanity up in some way, which are views that come from a starting point of self-importance. The idea that aliens might look at us with about as much consideration as we look at squirrels doesn't appear quite as often, but it makes a lot of sense. The wishing room having no preset purpose, allowing for various interpretations and clashes of ideas, was excellent. The idea that the room will grant the deepest desire, not what you actually ask for, was also clever. Through some ongoing dialogue, the stalker outlined how a person went to the room with a stated intention of doing something for their family, but the room gave him some cash instead because it knew what he was really about. Selfish prick. So would you take the chance of finding out the divide between who you are and who you think you are, or who you want to be, is far greater than you know? The ambiguity of whether the room grants wishes at all, or if the perils the stalker claims surrounded them in the zone really existed, were also decent world building. The audience accepts these things as true, but it makes sense for the characters in the story to not be so sure and act accordingly. Whatever the reason for the color changes, it made for an interesting visual effect. Ambient sounds like train tracks and water dripping created a rhythmic effect that fed into the vibe, and combined well with the character's propensity to take naps to create a dreamlike atmosphere. There's a lot of water in the zone. The characters always seem to be slogging through it, or looking at it, or lying in it, which evokes memories of being stuck in wet socks and shoes and just miserable and frustrated by it. The images of objects submerged also had a cool civilization destroyed by its hubris kind of thing, a la Atlantis or Sodom and Gomorrah. For me, these scenes brought to mind a deeply foreboding poem by Edgar Allan Poe called The City in the Sea, I'll link a description, contributing to the ominous feel throughout. The movie featured poetry on a couple of occasions, so that reference isn't completely out of left field. Or maybe it is, I don't know. But there are parts of the world building that didn't quite connect. There's a bit of a for the movie to happen effect. For the movie to happen, the boys need to get past the guards into the zone, but it's impossible to believe anyone guarding a region with a single entrance point along a railroad track could do so with this much ineptitude. For the movie to happen, the stalker also needs to withhold information, because the characters wouldn't take certain actions if he just used his words. So on more than one occasion, we're left thinking, you couldn't have just said that before? But he can't, because the movie needs to happen. There's also a bit of a show and tell issue. The stalker tells the others and the audience on numerous occasions a person will die if they don't stick to the path he's navigating, but we never see that happen, so will they? He also tells the others and the audience on numerous occasions that the zone is constantly changing and reinventing itself, and yet he follows a clearly established route with landmarks he's intimately familiar with. So does it? We're told one thing but shown another. So Tarkovsky is asking for the benefit of the doubt from the audience when he could just show something that erases that doubt, like another traveler who doesn't listen and disappears, or the stalker being lost at times. Nothing significant, just little things reinforce the rules of the world. For themes, there's a lot to unpack. And this is likely where the audience either has a viewing experience they enjoy or just not so much with this film. We see clashes between faith and cynicism, hope and despair, the intelligentsia and common folk, and between different types of intellectuals. The film explores concepts related to suffering as unmet desires, true needs versus superficial wants, the nature of resilience, and the dynamic of joy needing sorrow to be genuinely felt. All fascinating themes. I'll leave the movie to speak for itself on them, but when it comes to philosophy on screen, I have two basic criteria. The first is consistency between motives and actions, and the second is respect for opposing viewpoints. A standard philosophy of the human person contains a view of the nature of the universe, a view of the nature of people, a diagnosis of what's wrong with the world, and a prescription for what can make it right. A character in a movie doesn't need to express all these things, but the writer needs to comprehend them on some level, or you end up with inconsistent characters, like someone defined by a certain trait that suddenly behaves in a way no one with that trait would ever behave because it's convenient for them to do so. The other criteria is there's nothing wrong with having a perspective that's presented in the most favorable light. But pretending there's only one way to see the world, or that anyone with a different viewpoint is just a bigot, in a Disney, Amazon, or Netflix sort of way, is not only inaccurate, it's deliberately manipulative. Stalker did great with both my criteria. It's a good movie to ponder over a few ideas. In conclusion, Stalker is a fascinating concept that does a good job contesting philosophical ideas against a backdrop of slow pacing and Russian sensibilities. I suspect if a viewer leans into fast-paced movies with a lot of action and dialogue that can be largely ignored, they're not going to hang in there for Stalker. I also find that people who claim to have an interest in philosophical concepts tend to have a narrow view of the one they believe to be most correct, and are dismissive of other perspectives. So the movie's willingness to put ideas out there, without declaring one the best and everyone who thinks otherwise a moron, isn't going to connect with a certain segment of viewers circa 2025. But it is an interesting film, and reinforces the basic notion that you don't need a massive budget or CGI special effects to tell a story in a movie. Just a good idea paired with the practical skills relevant to delivering the idea through the illusion of pictures in motion. If alien contact in an unintended, indirect, and indifferent way fascinates, my prescription is another of Tarkovsky's films, Solaris, The Sphere, and Event Horizon. Decent films, but nothing great to be honest. Anyway, I'm Dr. Balthazar. Like what you like, don't you don't. It's all your call, Kemosabe.